so very, very much for being here. I'm Tim Hathaway. I'm the Executive Director with Prevent Child Abuse North Dakota, and we are just pleased that we have members of our coalition here, as well as members of the community and members of the press. Thank you so much again. We have gathered an ad hoc coalition to oppose Measure 3. It's a group of not-for-profits that feel very strongly that Measure 3 would make vulnerable people, especially children, even more vulnerable. So we have a slate of individuals that are going to speak to us this morning and share their positions on this issue. I will begin with just a couple of brief comments. Prevent Child Abuse North Dakota is an organization, not-for-profit here in the state, that shares a number of different positions relative to protecting children, especially when it comes to work in the state around our legislative issues. We feel very strongly that we need to take a stand when there are things that potentially impact the safety of children in our state. We are urging a no vote on Measure 3 because it will seriously undercut protection for children in our state by opening the door for people to claim religious freedom as a justification for maltreatment. This amendment to our Constitution offers no express protections for civil rights or health and welfare of others and will lend itself to abuse. Further, we believe that it could permit a person to mistreat a child and claim that that act was a religious act. We believe that this also will potentially tie up much time and resource in legal struggles. And finally, we believe that religious freedom is crucial, and that is why it is already currently protected in the North Dakota Constitution. I'm going to turn it over, and we'll ask Gladys, I think, next to share her comments.
I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Gladys Cairns, and right now my profession is being a wonderful grandma. But at one point in time I had the responsibility, and thankfully had the responsibility to direct how child protection was provided in the state of North Dakota. I remember early on when I started that we weren't acknowledging or didn't understand child sexual abuse, for example. And we had very few reports of suspected child sexual abuse. And we learned how devastating child maltreatment is. We learned how devastating it is for a caregiver, a person responsible for the child's health and welfare, to hurt them. And we have an obligation as citizens of North Dakota to intervene, and we have done that. And I also learned over those years that I had that responsibility, that North Dakota cares deeply about what happens to their children. And we will not and do not condone the maltreatment of children, whether it's physical abuse, sexual maltreatment, or neglect. My concern with Measure 3 is that we can't say, well, it won't include child maltreatment, it won't include child sexual abuse. Certainly we have a responsibility as a state to protect children, and this measure won't get in the way of that. But I recognize that particularly when it talks about a specific act, that each time we get a report of child sexual abuse, and if the caregiver says, wait a minute, I am doing this because I believe, I have this religious belief, I hold that religious belief very high, and that's why I'm doing it, that we then, the people, will have to look at how we justify intervention before we can do the intervention. I don't think people of North Dakota want that. I think we want to be able to intervene when we get a phone call, when we get a report that a child is being molested or neglected or abused, that we want to be able to intervene promptly in good conscience and provide the services that are necessary so that child doesn't have to suffer anymore. Yes, indeed, we all believe, and we hold dear in our heart, the whole issue of religious freedom. And I believe strongly that we have that today. I'm not sure why this measure has come up, what kinds of things. I'm assuming it is not because of the whole way that adults can maltreat children. So it is best to look at this as something that may indeed interfere in our ability to reach out to that child. A child who is being molested or abused or neglected wants that to stop. If they are being sexually molested or abused or neglected because someone is saying God or whatever religiously says I should be doing this or I can do this, that also then tells that child that they are not being protected, not only by us, the citizens of North Dakota, but their God. So we don't want to.
Sure. Do we need to go this time? Good. Make any apologies for congestion sounds. But I'm Renee Strumme, the Executive Director of the North Dakota Women's Network. We're a statewide women's advocacy organization. The core of our mission is to improve the lives of women in North Dakota. And we have great concerns about Measure 3 and the board has taken an opposition role resolution to Measure 3. We feel that the measure is written in a way that will create loopholes due to its lack of protection for individual civil rights. And what we mean is that it means individuals who break a law or discriminate against another person have a protected defense, and that the state must prove in court otherwise. If Measure 3 passes, it could allow a person to take advantage and use personal religious beliefs to claim the right to break important laws that are meant to protect all of us, like laws against abuse and discrimination. An example is an employer could use religious beliefs to fire a pregnant woman because she is unmarried. And so let's think that through. We now have a single mother, unemployed, struggling to make ends meet to care for the welfare of her family, and her employer would have a protected defense for his action, and a judge would have to determine otherwise. Supporters of Measure 3 claim that concerns about abuse and discrimination aren't warranted because the government has a compelling interest to protect victims of abuse and discrimination. However, Measure 3 would mean the government would have to prove its case each and every time someone takes advantage of the law, giving those who take advantage of the law the upper hand while taxpayers foot the bill for endless litigation. Differently than laws in other states that are meant to protect religious freedom, it's like comparing apples and oranges when you discuss the ones that are in other states. The truth is, Measure 3 could lead to endless litigation and serious, even harmful consequences for North Dakotans.
I'm Jennifer Weisgerber. I'm the Executive Director for the North Dakota Council on Abuse and Women's Services. We're a statewide nonprofit organization representing 21 domestic violence and rape crisis centers across the state. We're proud to be here today joining this coalition of nonprofits in urging a no vote on Measure 3. Last year alone, nearly 5,000 victims of domestic violence sought services from one of our crisis centers. And 22% of those victims were assaulted by a gun, and another 29% were assaulted by a knife. What we're seeing across the state, not only in the oil patch, but also just across the state, domestic violence is becoming more lethal. This year alone, we've seen 4 domestic violence homicides already. 4 is too many. It's just something that we're really concerned about as a coalition. We see countless number of victims that come into our programs every day, into our shelters, asking for services. What we're really struggling with right now is providing those very basic services that they're requesting, because the more requests we have, the more need that we have, we're not able to allow folks to get out and find some self-sufficiency, especially with the housing crunch that we're seeing across the state. We serve a lot of victims that come into shelter. After that 30-day stay, 60-day stay, we're not able to move them into a more self-sufficient place place for their life. There aren't apartments, so what we're seeing is we're turning away a lot of victims. So this is something that we're concerned about is, yes, our numbers continue to stay at the same rate, but we're turning away a record number of victims every day. All forms of violence, like I said, is increasing. Domestic violence specifically, the lethality, strangulation cases are up. But North Dakota law is currently clear. Domestic violence is a crime, and all offenders are treated equally under our current law. Under Measure 3, as Renee mentioned, we've had a lot of discussions with the proponents of Measure 3 about domestic violence victims and whether or not this would cause concern for victims and their ability to access services or offenders being held accountable. And they do say that there are current protections and that the government can make that decision. We're really concerned that this would allow offenders to have one other tool in order to hold victims in relationships. We've heard countless stories from survivors that say how religious is important to them in their marriage, and it's often used against them. I can think of one survivor that talked specifically when she got married and how, she called herself a Jesus freak. It was really important to her and how religion was so important to her marriage. And that often served as a barrier for her to escape the marriage because she felt so tied to religion. So, we too are very, tied to religious, beliefs and making sure people have those abilities. But under Measure 3, an offender could claim that laws don't apply to him. Because his religion teaches him that he has the right to discipline his wife and his kids. Why should we treat that person any different than anybody else under the law that can commit a domestic violence crime? Since 1979, when the first domestic violence statute was passed, the legislature made it very clear that domestic violence was a crime. And each year since then, we worked tirelessly to improve those laws, add additional protections to make sure victims have that choice, that they can escape the violence. This is yet another tool that would potentially tie their hands in escaping the violence. Measure 3 would undermine over 30 years of the work that we've had in the state to protect victims of domestic violence, and therefore we urge you to vote no on Measure 3.